In the remote mountain village of Ashmore, the world seemed to move slower, as if time itself bowed to the silence of the pines. Life there was simple, but for Noah and Nathan, 13-year-old twins born without sight, it was never ordinary. They were inseparable, two shadows sharing one soul. Where one went, the other followed, and always at their side was Guide, their loyal German shepherd, sharp-eared and steady, the eyes they never had. Villagers often whispered that the bond between the boys and the dog felt more like fate than chance. On stormy nights, when thunder rolled over the ridges, Noah would rest his hand on Guide's thick fur, while Nathan hummed softly, both boys leaning against each other like two halves of a single lantern fighting the dark. They knew the paths of the forest better than anyone, counting steps, listening to the wind, their blindness never holding them back. To those who watched them, the twins seemed untouchable, two spirits wrapped in unbreakable trust. But fate has a cruel hand. The storm that came tearing down the valley that week was unlike any before. Rain lashed against the rooftops, lightning split the sky open, and within 2 days both boys were gone. The details blurred into whispers, Nathan collapsing first, Noah following before the family could even grasp their grief. Ashmore sank into silence, as if the mountains themselves mourned. The funeral was hurried, small and heavy with despair. 2 wooden coffins stood side by side, raw pine glistening under candles that flickered with every draft. Parents clung to each other, neighbors bowed their heads, and the air was thick with the kind of sorrow no words could name. The only sound breaking through the priest's prayer was the low whine of Guide, lying between the coffins, tail stiff, ears twitching at every creak of the floorboards. Then, without warning, the dog growled, a deep, guttural sound that made everyone freeze. Guide sprang to his feet, hackles raised, and lunged at Nathan's coffin, paws scraping against the wood. Gasps filled the room. Before anyone could move, a child's voice cut through the air. Sophie, the twins' 7-year-old cousin, pointed with a trembling hand, her face pale. "Uncle, Auntie, Nathan moved! I saw it!" The crowd turned, their eyes wide with disbelief. A heartbeat passed, then another, until the room fell into complete silence. And in that silence it came, a soft, deliberate knock from inside the coffin. Candles flickered. The priest dropped his book. Someone screamed. Phones slipped from hands as panic rippled through the mourners. Mothers pulled children close, fathers stepped back in shock, and the parents of the twins staggered forward, torn between terror and hope. Guide barked once, sharp, furious, echoing like a gunshot in the chapel. Everyone's chest tightened as the impossible truth pressed against them. Maybe death had not been the end. The knock from Nathan's coffin haunted everyone long after the funeral ended. For Alina, their mother, the sound replayed in her head like a wound that refused to close. But to understand what happened in that candlelit chapel, you had to go back to the days when Noah and Nathan were still alive, when shadows had already begun to coil around their fragile bond. Noah had always been the stronger of the two. Though blind, his steps carried a certainty, as if he could sense the world bending to his will. He was the shield, quick to defend Nathan from cruel jokes whispered by other children, ready to take any fall so his brother wouldn't have to. Nathan, in contrast, carried a softness that drew people in. His voice was gentler, his touch hesitant, and his silences often longer than his words. Yet within that silence lived something else, something Noah couldn't protect him from. It started innocently. Nathan would tilt his head at night, listening to corners of their room no one else noticed. He whispered under his breath when he thought no one was awake. "He's here again," he once murmured, clutching the blanket to his chest. When Noah pressed him, Nathan simply said, "My friend in the dark. He talks to me when it's quiet." Noah tried to laugh it off, but a chill crept into his bones that never left. Months later, Noah stumbled across Nathan's hidden notebook. It wasn't written in ink. It was carved in braille, pressed so deeply into the paper that the dots felt sharp beneath his fingertips. Over and over again, Nathan had inscribed the same phrase, "The Watcher waits." Interspersed between the words were strange, jagged shapes that felt like trees, circles that might have been eyes, and long, twisting lines that suggested a gate. Each page carried the weight of something more than imagination. When Noah brought the notebook to Alina, desperate for answers, she brushed it aside. "He's fragile, Noah. Don't encourage his fears. It's only his mind playing tricks." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she pushed the notebook into a drawer. Noah knew she was afraid to look deeper, afraid to admit that something was wrong. But Guide, their German shepherd, knew. The dog's instincts were sharper than sight. On countless nights, Guide would leap to his feet, hackles raised, growling at the empty window as if something stood just beyond the glass. His bark cut through the silence like an alarm no one wanted to hear. Sometimes Nathan would smile faintly at those moments, as though acknowledging an unseen presence. One evening, as thunder rolled outside, Noah woke to find Nathan standing in the middle of the room, bare feet cold against the wooden floor. His unseeing eyes were wide open, fixed on the window where the curtains swayed though no wind had passed. "He's almost here?" Nathan whispered, his voice hollow, far older than his years. Noah gripped his brother's arm, shaking him, begging him to return to bed. Guide barked furiously, circling them, desperate to drive something away. But Nathan's lips curved into a strange, eerie smile. "Don't worry, Noah," he said softly. "The Watcher promised he won't take me alone." In that moment, Noah realized what terrified him most. It wasn't the dark, or the whispers, or even the unseen presence pressing against their fragile world. It was the thought that whatever hunted Nathan had already set its eyes on both of them, and it was only waiting. The whispers in the night had always unsettled Noah, but nothing prepared him for the morning when Nathan collapsed. It was sudden. One moment Nathan was humming to Guide, his thin fingers stroking the dog's fur, and the next his chest seized in violent spasms. His breath came shallow, ragged, his sightless eyes rolling back. "No! Stay with me!" Noah cried, cradling his brother on the cold floor. Guide barked frantically, pawing at Nathan's shoulder, but the boy's small body stiffened, then fell terrifyingly still. By the time their mother rushed in, Nathan's lips were already pale. The doctor would later call it a heart seizure, rare and unpreventable. But Noah knew better. This wasn't medicine. It was the Watcher. Grief hollowed the house that night. Elena sat silent, her face buried in trembling hands. Guide paced endlessly, whining as if searching for someone who had simply stepped out of reach. Noah sat alone in their room, clutching Nathan's notebook of braille scratches, whispering his brother's name like a prayer. But less than 24 hours later, tragedy deepened. Elena found Noah slumped on the bed, his arms wrapped tightly around Guide's neck. His breathing had stopped, his expression eerily calm, as though he had chosen to follow Nathan wherever he had gone. Guide's howls shattered the silence, a sound so raw it made neighbors stop in their tracks. The village called it fate, or perhaps something darker. "The forest has claimed the twins," they murmured, voices hushed with superstition. "The mountain's spirits have taken what they were owed." The funeral came swiftly, grief pressing like fog over Ashmore. 2 coffins now stood side by side, their surfaces gleaming with fresh pine. Mourners wept, some whispering prayers, others refusing to meet Elena's hollow gaze. Guide lay between the coffins, silent now, his body curled tight as if guarding both boys even in death. Then it happened. Just as the priest lifted his voice in final blessing, Guide sprang to his feet, barking with a ferocity that shook the rafters. His claws raked against Nathan's coffin, tearing wood fibers free. Panic erupted as mourners gasped and stumbled back. And then, cutting through the storm of disbelief, came a sound no one would ever forget. 3 deliberate knocks from within the coffin. The chapel fell into chaos. Elena screamed. Sophie clutched her mother's skirt, eyes wide in terror. And in that moment, every whisper about the Watcher no longer felt like superstition. It felt like truth knocking from the other side of the grave. The night after the funeral, the house carried a silence so heavy it pressed against the walls. Elena couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards seemed louder, every draft colder. Around midnight, she rose to check on Sophie, only to freeze in the hallway. Soft footsteps echoed just ahead of her, measured, deliberate, like someone pacing. "Mike?" she whispered, but her husband was still in the bedroom. Guide stood rigid beside her, hackles bristling, teeth bared at the darkness. A low growl rumbled from his chest, deep and unbroken. The air smelled of damp earth, though the windows were shut tight. Elena's breath caught as she passed the old hallway mirror. Its glass was clouded, as if fog had gathered on the inside. Slowly, words began to appear across the misted surface, written by an unseen hand. "She's next." The letters dripped down like tears. Elena staggered back, clutching Sophie's doorframe, her heart slamming in her chest. Guide barked sharply, lunging toward the glass, but there was nothing to strike. The words dissolved into vapor, leaving only her reflection, pale, hollow-eyed, afraid. The following morning, the funeral home called. Nathan's coffin, which had been sealed tight, now bore deep scratches across the inside lid. His hands no longer rested neatly folded. They had shifted, twisted upward, as though clawing for escape. The director's voice faltered as he explained, struggling to find a rational cause. Elena dropped the phone, her body trembling. That afternoon, Sophie sat cross-legged on the floor with crayons scattered around her. She drew in silence, her small hands moving quickly, almost feverishly. When she was done, she held up the page. Nathan stood in the picture, his hand clasped by a tall, faceless figure drowned in shadow. Beside them, Noah appeared with Guide at his side, facing the figure as if preparing to fight. Elena felt her knees weaken. The drawings, the scratches, the words in the mirror, everything pointed to one truth. Death had not freed her sons. Something still watched. Elena could no longer bear the silence that followed her like a shadow. The words in the mirror, the scratches in the coffin, Sophie's disturbing drawings, every sign pointed to something far older than grief. Desperation drove her to the one person in the village who might understand, Jonas, the blind man who lived at the edge of the forest. Jonas was nearly 80, his sightless eyes clouded white, yet his mind sharp as flint. He had once been a woodcutter until tragedy silenced his home. 30 years ago, he too had lost a grandson, another boy taken without warning. The villagers called it a sickness, but Jonas knew better. He had heard the footsteps in the hall, the whispers in the rafters, and the hollow laughter that came from the trees at night. When Elena arrived, Jonas was already waiting on the porch, his cane tapping the worn boards. "You've seen him, haven't you?" His voice was steady, not surprised. "The Watcher doesn't hide from mothers. He wants you afraid." Elena froze. "What is it? What does it want from my boys?" Jonas tilted his head toward the forest, as if he could still see its black outline. "The Watcher is no man. He is hunger given shape. He waits in the dark for children who can sense him. The blind ones, the twins especially, they can see what others can't. And that draws him like blood draws wolves." Elena's throat tightened. Nathan spoke of a friend in the dark. He said he wasn't alone. Jonas nodded, his expression grim. "Every 30 years the Watcher returns. He feeds on fear, devours bonds stronger than flesh. Twins give him power because their souls are tied together. He doesn't just take one, he threatens both until sacrifice becomes inevitable." Guide growled low at Elena's feet, ears pricked toward the woods as if the name alone had summoned something. Jonas leaned forward, his blind eyes fixed on the sound. "Be warned, Elena, what the Watcher claims, he does not easily release. But there is one truth he cannot bear, courage that refuses him." Elena clutched Sophie's hand tighter, her heart pounding. For the first time, she understood that her children's deaths were not an ending. They were part of a cycle, one that had begun long before her, and one that was still waiting for its final claim. That evening, Elena could not shake the dread curling inside her chest. She sat with Nathan's Braille notebook in her lap, fingers brushing across the indents like wounds pressed into paper. The final page had changed. Words had carved themselves in deep, uneven lines. Midnight. The twisted oak, bring her. Her heart stuttered. She knew who her meant. When the clock struck 12, Elena wrapped Sophie in a coat and took her hand, though every instinct screamed to run the other way. Guide padded silently at their side, muscles taut, his breath fogging the cold night air. The path through the woods seemed alive, branches swaying without wind, whispers threading through the trees. Sophie squeezed her mother's hand until her knuckles whitened. They reached the clearing, and there it was, the twisted oak, its branches warped like grasping arms. Beneath it, shadows thickened into a figure. It towered, faceless, its head tilting in unnatural jerks. Then 2 eyes flared open, red, burning, hungry. Elena felt the ground tilt beneath her. Sophie's voice broke, trembling. "It wants me, Mama. Because Noah fought back. Now it comes for me." Tears streaked down her face as she buried her face into Elena's side. Guide stepped forward, a growl rumbling from deep in his chest. Then he lunged, barking with such force the forest itself seemed to recoil. His body collided with the shadow, but instead of falling, the darkness folded around him, swallowing his frame like smoke. Guide reappeared a moment later, thrown back, yelping but unbroken. He rose again, baring his teeth, ready to fight until his last breath. The Watcher extended a hand of mist, long fingers curling toward Sophie. The air turned icy, crushing, as if the trees themselves bent under its will. Elena clutched her daughter tighter, her voice shaking but fierce. "You cannot have her." But the forest dimmed, swallowed whole by night, and in that black silence the Watcher's whisper crawled into her mind. "You cannot stop what has already begun." Elena's cry still echoed in the clearing when the air shifted. The Watcher's form rippled like smoke, and from the shadows 2 figures emerged. For a heartbeat, Elena thought her mind had broken, because the faces before her were faces she had already buried. Noah stood tall, his hand resting firmly on Guide's collar. The dog leaned against him, steady, as if the boy's touch alone kept him anchored to this world. Beside them appeared Nathan, his posture slumped, his head tilted toward the Watcher. His eyes were hollow, empty pools that glowed faintly as if lit from within by something not his own. "No," Elena gasped, her knees weakening. "Not my boys?" The Watcher's faceless head tilted, and its voice crawled through her skull without lips or tongue. "One remains. One is freed. Choose." Sophie clutched her mother's arm, sobbing. Guide whimpered, a sound filled with pain, as though even the dog understood the weight of the moment. His ears flattened, his body trembling, torn between protecting the living child and following the twins into the abyss. Noah took a step forward, his blind eyes fixed with a strange clarity, as though seeing more in this darkness than he ever had in the light. "Mother," he said softly, his voice breaking with tenderness, "we've always been together. Since the beginning. Nathan can't carry this alone." Nathan lifted his hand weakly toward his brother, lips parting. His voice came thin, laced with the Watcher's whisper. "It doesn't want one of us. It wants the bond we share. It feeds on it." Guide whined again, pawing at Noah's leg, as if begging him not to finish the thought. But Noah crouched, pressing his forehead against the dog's. "You've always been our eyes, Guide. Tonight, you'll be hers. Protect Sophie. Protect Mama." The dog whimpered louder, then licked his hand as though sealing a promise. Elena's heart tore as she reached for Noah, but he only shook his head. "This isn't your choice, Mama. It's ours." He turned to Nathan and took his hand. Despite the shadow clinging to Nathan's skin, despite the Watcher looming above them like a storm, the gesture was simple, pure, 2 halves rejoining as one. "If we go together," Noah whispered, "the cycle ends." Nathan's lips curved, and for the first time since death, his voice carried warmth. "Then let's finish it." The Watcher roared, a guttural sound that rattled the trees, but its faceless head jerked back as if struck. Light began to shimmer where their hands joined, faint at first, then blazing. Sophie shielded her eyes, crying out as brilliance poured from the boy's clasped palms. "No!" Elena screamed, lunging forward, but the ground itself split, a chasm of black yawning beneath the oak. The twins stepped toward it, their figures bathed in radiance. The Watcher clawed at the air, desperate, but the glow seared through its form. Elena fell to her knees, arms wrapped around Sophie, as the final words of her sons reached her. "We love you. Always." Then they stepped into the dark together. A thunderclap shook the forest as the chasm swallowed them whole. The Watcher screamed, a shriek so piercing it split the night, before its body shattered like glass into shards of smoke. The twisted oak trembled, its branches snapping, and then silence. The clearing blazed with white light one last time, then dimmed into calm. Where the Watcher had stood, only soft ash drifted, dissolving into the soil. The air felt different, lighter, clean, as though a curse had been broken. Guide stood rigid, ears forward, tail raised. Then he lowered his head and howled, a long, mournful sound that rose to the heavens, carrying the farewell of brothers who had given everything. When the echo faded, all that remained was the stillness of the forest and the unshakable truth. Noah and Nathan had chosen sacrifice, and in their choice, they had ended the Watcher's reign. When the blinding light finally faded, Elena found herself kneeling in the clearing, Sophie limp in her arms. The child stirred, eyes fluttering open, and whispered, "They're gone, Mama, but they're free." Beside them, Guide lay on the ground, chest heaving, his fur scorched with ash. Yet his amber eyes shone, catching the moonlight as if carrying the last spark of Noah's spirit within. Beneath the twisted oak, the earth had sealed shut. Where darkness once clawed, two blossoms now grew side by side, one white, one violet, bending gently in the night breeze. Elena touched them with trembling fingers, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "My boys," she whispered, "you kept your promise." In the days that followed, Sophie clung to her sketchbook. One morning, she brought a drawing to her mother, Noah and Nathan, laughing in a field of light, with Guide bounding happily beside them. "They're okay now," Sophie said with quiet certainty. "They told me in my dream." Elena held the paper close to her heart. She no longer feared the shadows in the hallway or the whispers in the night. The Watcher was gone. What remained was love, transformed, eternal. At dusk, Guide often sat by the front door, ears perked, eyes fixed on the horizon. Sometimes he would lift his head and release a soft whine, as if answering a voice only he could hear. Elena would sit beside him, hand resting on his fur, and whisper, "I know. You still hear them too." The forest of Ashmore grew quiet again, but to Elena and Sophie, silence no longer meant fear. It meant remembrance. For some bonds are too strong to be broken, even by death. Elena would often tell her daughter, "Love doesn't end, Sophie. It becomes light, and that light will always guide us home." And when the wind swept through the trees, carrying faint echoes of laughter, Sophie would smile, knowing her brothers were still near, just in a place beyond sight.